Rosie the Riveter was the inspiration of women working in defense industries during World War II, since many men of military age were off fighting in the war. Rosie the Riveter posters helped encourage women all over America to start working in factories that produce weapons and military defense, and also help maintain a healthy society. Rosie the Riveter is supposed to be based off of Naomi Parker Franley, but there were also other women involved who helped create the image of the poster. The impact that Rosie the Riveter had on many women during World War II was after the war, women were able to stay in their jobs, and eventually men came back from fighting the war and they did not have as much superiority as before. Women still get paid less, as they still do today, but they kept at it because they found their jobs interesting. So in the end, Rosie the Riveter paved the way for women in the workforce to expand their interests, and now women are able to work freely wherever they want today.
The Rosie the Riveter propaganda campaign during World War II proved pivotal in the Allies' victory over the Axis powers. The iconic image became the major inspiration for women to remain in the workforce after the war and helped shape a new and accepted social norm of women in society. The topic Rosie the Riveter relates to the theme of debate and diplomacy because it was debated if women were fit to work in the workforce and what they were supposed to do after the war. In the time period of 1939 to 1945, World War II, most people didn't find it fit for women to be in the workforce. When men of age were able to fight in the war left, America realized that they needed more help to produce weaponry and to hold everyday jobs. The American people started to call women to take over jobs that were originally meant for men and only men. In other places of the world, like Germany, Adolf Hitler believed that women working in the workforce was disgraceful. In the article, History at a Glance, Women in World War II, in the text it states, the role of German women, he said, was to be good wives and mothers, to have more babies than the Third Reich. What ended up happening was Germans didn't have enough people working behind the scenes, working on items to help them succeed in the war. This was one of the reasons why America won the war. Some Americans still believed that women weren't as good at the jobs as men were, and that they weren't smart enough to stay in these jobs. Women decided to stay in the workforce, but when men came back, they wanted their jobs back. So they decided to work in lower-paying jobs. Some women didn't have the options to stay in the jobs, as their old ones were irrelevant to the new everyday life, like sending secret messages to people fighting in the war.
One of the contributing factors for America winning the war against Germany was that America utilized our women before Germany realizing the support of their women. America found that when men of age went into the war, our country didn't have enough people working in factories that produced simple things like food and tools to weaponry and sending messages out onto the battlefield. America wasn't perfect. It still took time for the American military to accept women volunteers. However, about 350,000 women served in the armed forces by the end of the war. Additionally, there was a large increase in women working in the workforce, with most of them working in office and factory jobs. 5 million women joined the workforce, but they didn't just do things that were for the war. They worked in everyday jobs too. This still made a difference. Women learned how to do simple, everyday jobs that before they wouldn't have learned to do. In the article, History at a Glance, Women in World War II, it states, when men left, women became proficient cooks and housekeepers, managed the finances, learned to fix the car, and worked in defense plants. This shows that women had or chose to do things that worked on keeping America in a healthy state so that when people returned from the war, there would be some sense of normalcy and made it so that we had a feasible chance of winning the war. In Germany, they didn't have women working in jobs that were originally only for the role of men. People believed that a woman's role was to look after the kids, be a good housewife, and keep the house clean and tidy. The war started for Germany in 1939 compared to America when it started December 7th in 1941. So, Germany had a head start, but they still decided not to utilize their women until 1943 when they realized they were losing. Even then, they primarily used forced enslaved labor, up to 7 to 8 million workers who played a critical role in the war economy. This enabled Germany to refrain from using women for factory work, farming, and industrial jobs. As the war turned against them in 1943, and especially 1944, Germany began drawing women into war industries and in the armed services. By the end of the war, several 100,000 women served in the military. So far, we have only used secondary sources to prove a point that women working during World War II had a major effect on us winning the war. These sources have been articles and books. Rosie the Riveter also inspired many women to go into the workforce during World War II to do things like simple everyday jobs to nursing men back to health on the battlefield. Rosie the Riveter posters have a strong female on it who was usually in uniform and said inspirational things like, "We can do it." Rosie the Riveter posters were propaganda that encouraged women to start working so that America could have a head start compared to Germany, who hadn't used their women yet. Rosie the Riveter had started to pop up in the 1940s and became a symbol for women's independence, which really intrigued women. Women even started calling themselves Rosies. There is also a song dedicated to Rosie the Riveter. Women weren't sure at first if they wanted to join, as they had kids to take care of, and for the most part, they had only been looked at as housewives. This led to America having to make compromises so that women could be happy and we could still have the materials we needed. At the beginning of 1942, men were sent off to fight, which meant that America had no time to spare and needed help with people back at home. This propaganda had such a great impact that from 1940 to 1944, there was an increase of 57% of women working, which was 12 million women working to 20 million women working. These posters also allowed women to choose things more freely than they had ever been before. They were now allowed to dress differently, behave differently, and had lots of career options. Without these women in posters, America might not have won the war, and women might not be able to be in the same positions as they are today.
With the change in jobs, they had to change other things too, like the way they dressed, including rarely wearing dresses. Some even decided they liked the jobs and wanted to stay in them. But then men came back and wanted their jobs back. When men told them they should go back to being housewives, few obliged. Instead, they fought to stay as they wanted to do something more in the world. Women did well, and soon men no longer were the only ones working, and women pushed hard to keep it that way. It still took many years, but over time, women became a normal part of society, working in jobs beside men. Although they were still getting paid less than men, they kept fighting for the rights to get paid equally. Since then, women have gotten more rights and can work in any job they want. There will always be setbacks, but Rosie the Riveter paved the path for America to accept a woman's role in society.
Rosie the Riveter propaganda campaign during World War II proved pivotal in the Allies' victory over the Axis powers. Although the iconic image became the major inspiration for women to enter the workforce and it helped shape a new and accepted social norm of women in society, there is still a long way to achieve economic and social equality to men. On one hand, there is a 57% increase of women working from 1940 to 1944. On the other hand, though, women today still get paid 82 cents for every dollar a man makes. The Equal Rights Amendment has also yet to get ratified to this day. It has been 50 years since it was placed before state legislators.
All the day long, where the rain or shine, she's a part of the assembly line. She's making history, working for victory. Rosie the Riveter keeps a sharp lookout for sabotage, sitting up there on the fuselage. That little frail can do more than a male can do. Rosie